Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Welcome to the Catholic Mama, where you'll learn how to deepen and defend your faith, find comfort as we share the vocation of parenthood, and learn how to raise your children confidently Catholic. I'm your host, Christine Mooney-Flynn. Let's get started. Hello and welcome back to the Catholic Mama. I'm your host, Christine Mooney-Flynn, and thanks for joining me on this episode where I'm very excited to get to talk to Catholic author Carrie Gress. She is the author of quite a number of books, but today I'm very excited to get to speak a bulk of the time about the Anti-Mary Exposed, Rescuing the Culture from Toxic Femininity. Thank you, Carrie, for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me.
So that was a very brief introduction, but I figure it's better to have the guests talk about themselves, because who doesn't like to talk about themselves a little bit? So if you wouldn't mind providing a little bit more color about who you are.
Well, certainly. I am pregnant with my fifth child right now, and I have a PhD from Catholic University of America in philosophy, although I use it very little these days. But I'm a stay-at-home mom, and I homeschool, and I happen to write books in my spare time, which people always say, how do you have spare time? But, it's one of those things. I actually figured out how to do this. I wrote my dissertation when my children were babies, and after everybody went to bed, I just started cranking away at it. And so it's nice. I kind of created the habits early on to get writing. And now it's sort of one of those things that's just fun and keeps me sane and keeps my brain moving in the midst of grammar lessons and the like. So
what ages are your kids that you're homeschooling?
10, 8, almost 7, and 5.
Okay. We just started our homeschooling adventure for the first time this year.
Oh, good for you.
Yeah, it's going well. We actually got it done mostly before our chat starts. So we did it today. Yeah. Didn't do it yesterday.
we haven't gotten that far yet. So you're way ahead of us.
I'm trying. Well, it's only, I have the one that's definitely doing school. Like he's kindergarten age. Mm-hmm. The one before him is just, she wants to be part of it. So as long as she's willing to sit there. And then the other one just is only 2. And causes a lot of distractions.
Yes, that's kind of the hardest part sometimes, I think, is like what to do with the 2-year-old.
Yeah.
That's when they get in the most trouble, come out and your bathroom's a disaster because they found the soap and where all the toilet paper rolls were, that kind of stuff.
Yep. So. I know the other day I just wound up putting a towel and a big pan of water on the floor and threw some utensils in it. I was like, please.
Oh, dreamy. Good idea.
Just do that.
Yeah, that's great.
It worked for a while. Less screaming. Well, thank you. Actually, I think I saw you on an interview on Life on the Rock on EWTN.
Oh, right. Okay.
And I had been watching, I think, all 5 minutes when I ordered your book.
Oh, that's great.
And what I really appreciate is, and you said it, you have a PhD, which, maybe you're not using it very much these days, but for as academic of a background as you have, you can tell in the book that you have that background, that basis of research and understanding and synthesizing, but then the writing style itself is so easy to get through. And
thank you.
Yeah, well, that's why I read it. I read it really fast.
Yeah.
I had a stack of books that I was planning on reading. I was like, this is going to take me a while, and I'm glad I started with your book because it made me feel like I was getting somewhere.
That's great. And that's obviously very intentional. I think I spent years reading academic books, and they're hard to get through, and it's really hard to figure out what people are saying sometimes, and there's a lot of jargon, and even in college, in graduate school, I sort of swore off doing women's issues because I just didn't like the way it was presented, and so it was really one of the things that I kind of fell into reluctantly or unwittingly, I suppose, just because I am a mother, and I just started noticing these huge gaps of things that we were discussing and dealing with. And, it just seems like this big hole of dealing with Catholic women's issues in a way that makes us feel, acknowledged, understood, edified, all of that. It's very hard to find that kind of content. So anyway, it's been a fun thing to get back into, but I definitely am not writing in academic ease at this point. And in fact, it's been fun to hear about people binge reading my book I think the record I've heard right now is another author told me he read the book in 3 hours.
Wow.
So I don't know if he was a speed reader or just another author and knew sort of what to skip, but
isn't it amazing though? You can spend months on a project that somebody can read in 3 hours.
I know, exactly. So anyway, but no, it's been great. In fact, I got an email yesterday, someone saying they had just read it for the 4th time, and all kinds of people are asking me for a study guide, which I just don't have time to put together. But hopefully actually this couple of people have said they're doing them themselves. So maybe we'll end up publishing one of these study guides. But I think there's a lot in this book. I mean, it could very easily be like a college course, I think, because I just kept writing and stuff just kept coming new. I'd find a new thread and, things like, why have we not ever read anything about this before? So I just kept digging, and it was really amazing. I think even as I was writing the book, the sense of, I would have these days where I would have this, a new insight, and I would spend like 3 days thinking about it. And then, but I can only imagine the reader's experience of all of this, like a fire hose in one sitting sometimes. So anyway, I think it's an amazing book in that respect. I feel really blessed to have written it because I think it is opening a lot of people's eyes and doing a lot of amazing things that you never dream of. You always dream of such things as an author, but you don't
know if those are going to happen.
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, it's a very interesting concept of the anti-Mary, and one that I hadn't come across before. But again, I'm a relatively new Catholic. Can you explain?
It's nobody actually has come across. I think I found some use of the word anti-Mary on the internet, a couple of like random places. But it's such a new word, we had to figure out how to spell it properly. Like, how did we want to spell it when we went to put it in the book? But the idea came to me when I was writing my book, The Marian Option, because I was just looking at all this incredible data about Our Lady and all these different ways that not only has she helped form the culture and help women understand who they are within relationship to God and men, and even this very basic idea that women have equal dignity to men. So much of it comes from devotion to her. So I was looking at, just all these amazing facets of how she's formed culture and how culture forms when people have strong devotion to her, and, on and on. And so I'm looking at her, and she's been called, even by National Geographic, the most powerful woman in the world. And yet looking at the elite women in our culture, and there's just this huge divide. I started looking at the specifics, like, what are the elite women saying? Well, they are saying, what is diametrically opposed. They haven't just sort of listed a little bit from Christian ideals, but they're just flip-flopped. I mean, it's completely like turned them on their head. And so it was at that point that the idea came to me, not, I wasn't thinking of one individual person as the anti-Mary, the way we think of like the Antichrist, but more as a spirit that has really infected women. We've kind of opened ourselves up to through sin and through laxness as Catholics, or as Christians, or even as a culture. And the Spirit has just sort of swept us up. And you can see that very, very explicitly in the 1960s and 1970s, and just what was going on in the radical feminist movement and what they were promoting, but also how the media was really, this is the first time TV was really used in such a dramatic way, and just that this way that it had on the minds of everyday women. I think it's going to be a long time before we are even able to sort of calculate the magnitude of that. So anyway, it was. So it's a spirit that sort of has affected people, where the women of our culture have taken on the vices of womanhood instead of really living out the virtues. Which is, of course, when we live out the virtues, that's when we're happy and we're flourishing, and the culture is thriving and whatnot. And we're sort of seeing all that turn on its head now.
Certainly, I mean, research shows we're the most unhappy we've been.
Yeah,
and it feels like it's at its peak, but who knows where it could go
one can
from
hope,
here.
But
let's hope it's peaking.
Yes.
When you say infection or infected, that seems like a very good word for it. After I had been duped myself by feminism years ago, and had slowly been coming out of it. And actually, my husband had done a good job of helping me to to see the falsehoods. And I remember being very angry at him. I was like, well, I don't feel like I feel like there is a patriarchy or whatever we were arguing about once. He's like, well, that's your feelings versus facts. And he presented these facts. Like, oh, so slowly, I didn't like it. He's like, I'm sorry you don't like it, but so I was very lucky to have somebody who was willing to be patient with me, explain this stuff. But I certainly was duped over time. But now that I, reading, say, the evidence so clearly presented in, say, your book, it does feel like an infection when you see just the way, women in mainstream culture are presenting themselves is pretty horrific.
Yeah, well, and the saddest part, I mean, this is where my real frustration is just these ideas came into fashion in the late 60s, and we haven't really done anything to combat them as a culture. We have absolutely allowed, I compare it with the Nazis rolling through France. They had one small line of defense, and then after that, the Nazis just kept rolling all the way to the ocean. And I kind of compare it to that we just haven't found a way to say, look, this is absolutely ridiculous. And there is, and what has happened too is not only have they presented their side as being very savvy and being this is what happy women do, successful, healthy women do. But they've also managed to paint anything that doesn't fit into their boxes as, these women are just doormats, that they don't have any personality. They can't think for themselves. They're not very bright. And so I'm always amazed at I read very few of them, but the comments to my articles and things, because that's always kind of the line that I get. One of my favorites was some woman saying that I must get a shopping list for my husband and get directions from him about how I clean my house. And, it's just kind of preposterous, and, really laughable. And yet that's how they've been able to paint us. And we haven't done a good job of, going on offense and saying, look, there's something incredibly beautiful and compelling and wonderful about this. And really presenting that on any level. And so much of that has to do with the fact that there's so much money on their side. I mean, you've got the birth control industry alone is $4 billion industry, is bankrolling magazines and, all kinds of political campaigns and fashion industry, all these things. And, our poor little NFP side is
not as well funded. There's not much to fund.
Exactly. So I think that is something that we as Catholics need to think differently about, is how is it that we, because the culture didn't become this culture of death because women were reading Karl Marx. It wasn't because they were doing all of this deep research into Margaret Sanger's books. It was because they were reading magazines. It was because they were watching movies and soaps and TV and reading books and, all these fashion magazines. Those are the things that really were laced with these ideas. And yet we have all these amazing ideas, kept making arguments, in journals and academic papers and on our own media, but we haven't found a good way to translate that into something that a broader culture can absorb in a healthy way. We're talking about healthy rhetoric here. Obviously, we're not, just trying to promote awful propaganda or something. So anyway, I think that's one of the things that has really inspired me in terms of some of the projects I'm working on. To, how do we start going on offense instead of always being on defense, and really showing that, Catholic women, actually, we know from science are the happiest women out there. And so how do we help convey that and sort of fight back against this sort of doormat understanding that they make us out to be?
Like I say, I feel like I'm susceptible to logic and reason, but even over the years reading fashion magazines, it never even dawned on me, because if it's in print, then it's validated and there's a reason it's there. Right. And I remember years ago, I was working at a day spa, and I was flipping through a magazine, and one of the hairstylists came up, and she was looking at it with me, and she's like, "That's not how you do that." Whatever the hairstyle was, or whatever it was, and it was the first time that, and I think almost all the way through college at this point, but that was the first time that I thought, oh, if they're wrong about that, could they possibly be wrong about anything else they're writing about?
Right.
And at that point, I do remember around the same time, they, it could have been in that same issue, but I was reading Cosmo regularly. Mm-hmm. And there was an article in there about like an introduction to pornography, how a woman should get started on pornography and all this other stuff. And it never occurred to me that just because it's in print, just like it's just because it's on the internet, doesn't make it true. But we're so used to having that as the authority. And
Absolutely.
the authority has spent a lot of money making itself that.
No, and I think that's just it. And that's, I have a whole chapter in here on this idea that I call the matriarchy, that is this sort of control that they have, over print, over Hollywood, politics, pop music, book publishing, the whole gamut is all the wagons are sort of circled around abortion and specifically. And it's amazing. If you look at the rhetoric, you get someone like Alyssa Milano, behind a microphone, and the rhetoric that she's using or anybody else is using from Hollywood is the same exact bullet points, that all these women from the 1960s are making. They haven't had to adjust because they don't get any pushback. So they can still blame the patriarchy, still tout out all of these lies. I think even Serena Williams recently blamed the patriarchy for her bad behavior on the tennis court. What does it have to do with anything? So nobody's really paying attention to the fact that this doesn't even make sense anymore. And, they're not paying attention to any of the science of development of the child. They're not paying any attention to women who regret their abortions and are, really struggling with the brokenness that comes from it. So yeah, it's incredible how much I think we have all just gotten used to it. And until you start seeing it, until someone points it out, then you just think this is just the way that it is.
That red pill moment.
Yeah. Thank you. That's exactly right.
So is this toxic femininity, I mean, was this kind of like a conspiracy, and then they've just been able to utilize the not useful, I don't want to say useful idiots, but the people who are willing to buy into all this stuff? Was it as planned as it's turned out to be?
That's an interesting question. I'm not a conspiracy theorist person, but we, as a Catholic, we know there is a conspirator. And so I think if you look back at the early, seeds of radical feminism, there definitely was a kind of something of a roadmap. And I pull this out in the book and talk about this litany that was chanted by 12 women in an apartment in New York City back in the 70s. And basically the whole idea was to destroy the family, ultimately what it comes down to. And they wanted to do that in this litany. They talk about doing it through by demolishing and by promoting eroticism, homosexuality, prostitution, abortion. And I think that might be everything on the list. But it's amazing to look at the list because they have achieved all of the things that they set, these 12 women that they set out to do. Now, if I get 12 women together, I'm lucky if we can make through the meal with, just kids and things that happen and things cropping up, or, someone has to leave and dessert doesn't happen or whatever. But the fact that this was their mantra, and they every week or whenever they got together. And of course there were occult elements to this as well. Mallory Millett, who's the sister of Kate Millett. Kate Millett was very instrumental in this group of 12. Kate has passed away, and Mallory has been telling more of her story now. And I spend a lot of time chatting with Mallory about this. And, these women also on Halloween would sat around at a table naked with a boa constrictor. There's very much an occult.
Quite wicked. Yeah.
It is really wicked. An occult piece to this as well. So you have, this mixing of Marxism and also of the occult. And, what's fascinating to me too, is just to even see the fact that they were able to take a lot of these Marxist ideas. And I lay this out in the book, you can see the things that happened in Soviet Russia happened here. But in Soviet Russia, they understood this was sort of these were outside ideas kind of being forced upon them. So there was this sense of rebellion, or, we're not going to let these foreign ideas affect who we are as Russians. But because of the fact that these women were able to make it so trendy and so hip and seem so compelling, we just took it on like hook, line, and sinker. We didn't even think about it like, maybe these are not good ideas. It was just sort of absorbed into the culture. So in any event, I think that there's definitely a spiritual dimension to all of this. The conspirator, the devil, knows how to get to women, knows how to get to us. And of course, you've got this simultaneous sexual revolution. All these things are kind of feeding into each other. And those are the kinds of sins, whether it's, any stripe of adultery, all of those things are happening, but you also have huge amounts of drug abuse. All of these things are huge doors to being open to, how the devil can influence us. I'm not saying possession, but I think we all know that we're tempted in different ways. And of course, the further away we get away from grace, the easier it is for him to sway our minds and whatnot. So anyway, yeah, I think that it's important to see that there's a spiritual element to all of this, which of course is brought out by the fact that it is anti-Marian. I mean, this is a timeless battle that we see throughout Scripture, and it's just playing itself out in real time in very dramatic ways because of the fact that our Christianity has become so weak. And we know when Christianity is weak, paganism is going to crop up, and it's kind of like a jungle; it just always creeps in. And so I think that's exactly what happened, and what we're dealing with today.
Yeah, so you have a few powerful architects with lots of money, and then it just kind of attaches itself to the culture. One of the things that popped out at me in the book was, I think, I don't know where it is, but magazine editors getting together was in the late 80s and deciding that they were all going to publish a pro-abortion pieces in their magazines at the same time.
Yeah, right. No, and I think that's the kind of thing that probably happens a lot more than we realize. And even just how much there's a piece a couple months ago in the Wall Street Journal saying, where are the pro-life or conservative women's voices in the culture? Like the Phyllis Schlafly's. And, I keep saying they're out there. They just can't get booked on any of these shows because, an underling booker on CNN is not going to risk her career by bringing Helen Alvarez on, Janet Smith, because she knows she'll be berated by her producer or whatever, so it's all these different layers of kind of, and not a concerted effort. It's kind of happened. Like people just know a pro-life woman is sort of taboo and you just don't book her on your show.
Because and even if you get somebody who's mildly or maybe more pro-life in private, I unfortunately had the opportunity to watch an episode of The View when I was at the gym one day, and it was right around the time of the Georgia heartbeat bill being passed or something. And there were a couple of more conservative pro-lifers on the panel, and but they just tiptoe. They won't come. It's like I'm pro-life, but why should I say that to anybody else? Yeah, that's my personal belief, but I'm not going to push it on anyone else. Whereas pro-abortion will just push.
and that's what it is. I mean, it amounts to a certain amount of bullying. In fact, there's this great book I recommend it all the time. A priest friend told me about it years ago, and I've probably read through it like 5 times. Called Warriors and Worriers, and it's basically describing kind of the sociology between men and women. But there's some fascinating information in this book that talks about the way that women can sort of gang up on each other and silence each other. So even if you look at The View, the pro-choice women are always going to outnumber the pro-lifers because they know by doing that, wittingly or not, that they can still keep the audience on their side. You've got these Joy Behar and Whoopi Goldberg. You've got your mainstays that the audience doesn't want to disappoint. So you have kind of this token pro-lifer that's there, but the pro-lifer will no matter how well executed her arguments are, just because of that social dynamic is always going to be outnumbered. And that's exactly what they want, because then they can control the argument and the temper and the tone of just how the room feels and how people respond to her and all of that, because she doesn't have anybody to sort of buttress her. So yeah, it's really interesting to see all of these sort of female tactics that I think, a lot of us, I don't even know how we learn them. I think they're just sort of, some of them are kind of inborn, and just part of the, original sin. But yeah, there's very definite patterns that, if you start paying attention, you can see how they're being used too. And in terms of the media.
Were you ever yourself duped into believing any of this stuff?
I was. It's interesting. I grew up Catholic, and I always had this really strong devotion to Our Lady. I was just fascinated by Lourdes and Fatima, and but then my dad died, and but I wasn't very devout. I mean, I was terribly catechized, and that was the big problem. I think if I had known what the church taught about different things, I would have I would have happily followed along. I just didn't know what they were, what a lot of the teachings were. I remember even in high school or in college, my roommate and I debating the true presence of the Eucharist. And, she had something like 20 years of Catholic education, and I had pretty similar numbers. And here we were not sure. So anyway, that just tells you kind of where it was. But I had a grandmother who was very involved in the New Age. She was a very broken woman. Her husband had been a very big philanderer, and I think she was just deeply broken and trying to find some kind of solace. So she found it in astrology and crystals. And I adored her. I mean, she and I were very close. And so I was interesting going through a lot of the books. I have a chapter on goddess worship, and I can't tell you how many of those books I'd already read, as a 20-year-old. So anyway,
that chapter alone, I was like, yep.
Yeah, I read that one.
Yeah. New Age was, it crept in pretty heavily in my teens and 20s. So yeah.
Yeah. And it's just out there, and, it seems really cool. And, I grew up in Eugene, Oregon, where it's very New Age town to be, it's used to be the pot capital of the world after Berkeley, California. Now I think it's the meth capital or something. So,
oh, great.
I know. I just started a new drug, but, anyway, so I can just see the battle, though, like looking at my college years between the pull of the culture and, just being your average college student, and then all this New Age stuff. And then, thanks be to God, I finally started just praying the rosary every Thursday morning with this group of amazing women. They were all my mom's age. And I just started joining them, and they taught me about Marian consecration. And it was there that I finally, and there was no internet. So it's not like I could do all this digging. We're really reliant upon what you were reading and found in your Catholic bookstores and that kind of thing. So anyway, yeah, it was, I think it's really miraculous that I ended up having this kind of faith, because, it would have been so easy for me to veer in several other directions than where I was going.
Well, you touched on it a second ago when you said the consecration to Mary and praying the rosary. Mm-hmm. So in all this bad news of what's happening in our culture now, there is a great hope.
Yeah. No,
that is Mary herself, right?
Absolutely. I think there's incredible hope. I think one of the first thing that we have to just recognize is that Satan's always going to go after the woman first. I mean, he did that in the Garden of Eden with Eve, and he knows if he gets her, he gets everybody. And I think the opposite is true. It's just how exciting it is. Here we are in this moment in time when it feels so dark. And I think so many of us, it's particularly as women and mothers that are home, feel like, well, what can I possibly do? But if you look back at the church, it's those women who influence their husbands, someone like Saint Monica, and their children and their neighbors, the Saint Bridget's, the Saint Cecilia's, all these amazing women. They weren't weren't preachers. They were just slowly converting their family members. And that's how that's the sort of the secret weapon of how the faith has spread. And so I think that we're doing incredible things, even though we don't really even realize it, by raising our families and helping our husbands, become holier, and forming friendships and all of these kinds of things that are just natural to us. These are these natural evangelical skills that we have built into us that we don't really even notice them, because I think we've spent so much time thinking of evangelization as apologetics, and yet it just comes so natural when you look at it through this lens. So I think that's the first exciting thing, is that it doesn't take that many of us to really change a culture. And I talked about this a lot in the Marian option too, that it's usually a small group of people that make some huge changes in civilization, and people that know it's on nobody's radar. So I think that's happening. But I think we're seeing, again, most of these Catholic groups have strong Marian devotions and are really recognizing, that the problem in the culture, God always supplies the antidote. And so this is why we've had such an uptick in devotion to Our Lady at this time, even the last century. I think Pope Leo XIII wrote, 12 or 13 encyclicals on Mary and the Rosary alone. And all of our popes have had a huge devotion to Our Lady. And of course, this dramatic uptick in Marian apparitions, just devotion to her. So I think that is very helpful too. And it's exciting to see just what a model she is. I think that we've got our work cut out for us to try and help people see that Mary isn't just, a sweet statue or a saccharine picture, but that she really is our mother and really wants to mother us and our children and those we love. And it's, it's not hard to reach out to her, but that's, of course, the first thing is really establishing that relationship through the Rosary. And of course, Marian consecration is a second step toward that. But she also is such a model to us because she really embodies what it means to have all these desires of our hearts met. And so in the second half of the book, I really wanted to focus on this idea of what are the things that women desire and how is that we can see that Our Lady shows us a way to have these desires met. So I looked at, it actually was funny because I looked at these three common things that seems like all women desire. The first one is, of course, to be known and loved. And the second one is to do the good. Even, looking at these radical feminists, they all thought that they were doing good by, taking a woman to get an illegal abortion or something like that. They just didn't understand what the good was, which is obviously part of the problem. So I think that's an inborn desire in women. And then the third desire, of course, is to be beautiful. So in the book, of course, I lay out how she is a model for all of these things. And beauty is, one of those, I think we poo-poo it so much, partially because it's been so corrupted. We spend billions of dollars on plastic surgery and cosmetics and, all of these things to make ourselves physically beautiful. And yet Our Lady has been called over and over again the most beautiful woman in the world. St. Bernadette said you'd want to die just so that you could see her again. She was so beautiful. But her beauty, of course, comes from the fact that she's, it's God's beauty that's infused through her. And that's the real kind of beauty that we all are after. And it's that kind of beauty that draws people to us. And that's where, evangelization becomes super easy because people see God in us, not us in us, but God in us. And that's really where some huge transformation can take place. So yeah, it's all of these are really laid out. But the funny thing was I wrote this book and I sent off to the publisher, and like a month later I was with my daughters in the hotel room, and someone had just said, "Oh, you guys should watch the Hallmark Channel." And we'd never watched it before, but we didn't have anything to do. And so we started watching the Hallmark Channel, and we watched one episode, and then we watched another episode. And then I think we went to bed, and one of my daughters threw up in the middle of the night. So I think we watched two more movies. And, but I was at the, the next morning, I was like, they are doing on the channel exactly these desires of women's hearts. You can see that they're using that model of, here's a woman that wants to be known and loved. She wants to do good. It's usually she's saving a library or something, and she wants to be beautiful. But I think there's also that element of wanting a happy ending. And that's, of course, what you see in the Hallmark Channel. But that's what we sort of own, is the happy ending. As Catholics, we know how things end. And I think that's, probably one of the pieces that I didn't include. I should, in maybe the next book, I'll give credit to the Hallmark Channel. But, just that reminder that we desire deeply to be home and in heaven with God and to be united with all those that we love. And that's something that we, obviously are striving for in our holiness. So it's all of those pieces that I think are being neglected in the culture. And sadly, the Hallmark Channel is the only one that stresses it.
At least we have a channel.
That's true.
Or that has a channel that does that.
Yeah, that's true.
I have a Marian statue out front of our house, and I am surprised that things grew because we just moved into this house and I wasn't really paying attention. I bought wildflower seeds and then realized that somebody had just put mulch down and it wasn't actual soil, but I threw the seeds down anyway. And wildflowers have grown up through these wood chips, which I'm still surprised. But a weed grew right underneath Mary's foot. And it's this weed that actually even with gloves on, it'll spike you. So I haven't touched it, but then I was like, that's a really good reminder. There's Mary stepping on this weed, and it's right under her foot. And I was like, I think I might just keep it there because it's a good reminder, because it's a very sweet, all the Marian statues are very sweet and wonderful looking. I was like, but there she is, destroying.
She's tough.
She is tough.
Exactly. Yeah. No,
the weed has not grown and pushed the statue over.
No. Oh, that's great. That's great. I love it.
But so you mentioned home, so I know you just had another book come out with a couple of co-authors, so I do want to mention Theology of Home. Can you just give a brief overview of what that book is? And that just came out this week, right? Or last week?
Yeah, last week. Yeah. It is, this is kind of, I feel like the anti-Mary was really, I was playing defense, sort of explaining where our problems are. And Theology of Home came to me, I was on my treadmill listening to the song about going home, and I was just struck by how that's really all that we desire. We just want to be home with God the Father in heaven. That's what all of our efforts are really for. And yet here we have this culture that's absolutely fascinated with home right now. Our home industry is something like $450 billion industry annually. And, this isn't just consumerism, but I think it's points to something deeper in the hearts of people that's not being fed properly. And so this book, Theology of Home, was really a response to that. How do we go on offense as Catholics? Because we have beautiful homes and we have beautiful families, and our lives are beautiful, even if they're messy at times. And I'm always amazed at. We have some friends that don't have children, and I'm always apologizing for things not being in order, and yet there's a depth there that they love and are drawn to, even if things are not camera ready, and within the four walls of our home. So anyway, it was a really fun book to write because I don't think there's anything like it in the Catholic market right now. It's because there's over 100 pictures in it. It's visually very beautiful. We wanted to make it kind of coffee table-ish, but still small enough that it could fit in your purse and you could take it with you and read it. But we didn't want it to feel like work as you were reading it. We just wanted it to be really beautiful meditations that you could sort of chew on and just take into your own life and live out in your own way within your home. So it's kind of laid out. There's some background on what a theology of home is or looks like, sort of defining that a little bit. And then we go into just these fun elements of home that, they're not exclusive to our home. They're also, we see them experience them in our church too, spiritual home. Things like light and nourishment and safety and comfort and hospitality, all these kinds of things. So it's just a fun book, but I think that it gets people thinking, but it's also the kind of book that I've been amazed at who's interested in it. Like I could give this book to anybody and I think they could find something in it and not be offended, unlike my other books where I'm offending people all over the place. So
nice change of pace.
Yeah, it has been a nice change. In fact, I just keep one in my purse. I have a copy that was just, I just pull it out sometimes and just show people who know me that know that I write books, but I never keep my books with me. But this one's just so much fun and different. And I even ran into a bishop I was down at EWTN last week and we were going through security and he was behind me and I let him go in front of me because he was in a much bigger rush than I was. But as it turned out, he was asking me what I was doing down there. And so I just pulled the book out and he said, "Oh, that's so beautiful." And I thought, here's a 75-year-old man that's probably never thought about decorating anything in his life. And yet, the first thing out of his mouth is it's a beautiful book. So anyway, I think it's the kind of thing that a lot of people are going to be drawn to for different reasons. But again, this universal hunger that we all have for home and the way that we really want our own homes to feel like a sanctuary and a safe place and, where we find healing and comfort and are restored and, all of those kinds of things. So that's what it does.
And so, yeah, when the book came in the mail and I opened it, the cover is just, everything's just so inviting about it. So it is a very beautiful book. So goodness and beauty. Wrapped up.
All that's in there.
Well, thank you, Carrie, for joining me on this. This has been awesome to get to talk to you. And I will put the links to everything that we've talked about. And then where is the best place to find you?
theologyofhome.com is really the best place. And this is, of course, our, David and Goliath attempt at like, how do we help support Catholic women in a way, a magazine style, because there's nothing out there right now. So it's an aggregate site. My co-author Noelle, Mary, and I run. It's content from both Catholics and fresh content every morning, but from both Catholic content, but also secular things that we sort of scour and make sure there's no questionable content either in the article itself or in the ads. We double checking those too. So that's the best place. And then we've also just opened up a store there where we're selling books, but we're also selling different products for the home.
Oh, great!
So that is the best place for people to find us.
What kind of products?
A couple of years ago, I was struck. Why are Catholics not making soy candles with Catholic themes and scents and whatnot? And I'd never made a candle before in my life, and but the idea just took hold, and I just thought we need to be doing this. So my husband and I started that. So we last year just did a run of 800 just to see if we could sell them, and we just blew through them. People just love them. We have one called Baptism that has the chrism scent. We have another called
that's a good one. Okay.
Guadalupe. Yeah, called Guadalupe, which is we developed this scent ourselves. That's a rose citrus blend. And then we have a third one called Victory, which is an old scent developed by the Carthusian monks on the island Capri. And it's just gorgeous and floral, and it's got some hints of lemon. And anyway, I have about 12 more candles I'd love to develop, but our resources are limited. So we've got those 3 as our standards, and those are coming out in a couple of weeks. But we have a jute bag. We're developing a cutting board and just some other things. So I just keep thinking, what would I love to have in my own home? And especially if I can add something beautiful and Catholic to that, even better. So that's kind of what we're working on right now.
That's awesome. I just bought some Catholic art for Christmas, and I didn't realize I had logged in with my husband's PayPal. And he's like, "What is this?" I was like, "It's Catholic." And he's like, "Oh, okay." So now I can go on to that site and just buy whatever.
Yes,
Catholic. It's from Carrie. I gotta get it.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Well, and that's been the funny thing. I found I was pregnant in June. And I hadn't had a baby in 5 years. I'm 46. I thought the Lord was done with us. And but then I got, I had all these plans for getting our store set up over the summer. And then I just got the smackdown of morning sickness. So we are a little behind the 8 ball. But I've decided this has just got to be our business model, is we're just going to roll things out when they're ready. And we've just been having a lot of fun developing different ideas. And so hopefully all kinds of different surprises will be popping up before Christmas.
And that'll just keep people coming back to the site to check in.
Exactly. What's new over at Theology of Home Mercantile? Right. Exactly.
Okay, so theologyofhome.com. And I'll put, again, anybody listening, I'll put all the links in on where to find Carrie and her books and that website. Again, thank you so much, Carrie, for taking some time this morning.
Oh, my pleasure. It's really great getting to know you.
Great. All right. Well, thank you again. And listeners, make sure that you subscribe so that you don't miss these episodes. They come out once a week, hopefully once a week. Again, I got wound up getting the morning sickness smackdown myself this spring. And I was and then we moved, and I was very grateful that I had some podcast episodes in the bank, but when I ran out of those, there was a slight hiatus, but I'm back now. And I said, it says I'm about to have another baby, so maybe there will be another one, but subscribe so you don't miss them when they do come out.
Keep everyone on their toes.
Yeah. Until next time. Don't forget to head over to thecatholicmama.com to get your free copy of How to Talk to Your Kids About God. This handy little ebook will teach you how to broach the topic of God with your children, or how to respond to your kids when they want to talk about God, as well as give you answers to 7 of the trickiest questions about the faith that Christian parents face. You'll love the easy to understand grown-up answers, the pared down but not talked down answers you can share with your kids, plus recommended resources if you'd like to deepen your understanding of the topic. Get yours free at thecatholicmama.com. Hi there, this is Christine Mooney-Flynn, host of the Catholic Mama podcast, and I'd like to invite you to join me over on the Catholic Mama. To develop a Christian family and raise children who are, and who, God willing, will continue to be confident Catholics, requires us as parents to be confident in our faith as well. So each week, I dive into topics that help to make sense of the Catholic faith and how to live out that faith in our vocation as husbands and wives, moms and dads. So whether you need help in explaining aspects of Catholic doctrine like the real presence in the Eucharist, or if you're looking for practical ideas on how to live a more Catholic life, my goal is that you'll find the answers and guidance you're looking for over on my show, The Catholic Mama. I hope to see you there.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.